Welcome to Connections, a podcast from the Graymere Church of Christ in Columbia, Tennessee. Our goal is to have discussions and messages that encourage us and strengthen our faith. We appreciate you joining us. Let's keep learning and growing together. Thank you for joining us for Connections. We have spiritual conversations that we hope will be encouraging, and I'm really excited that we have Demetrius Nelson with us. He preaches for the Carmack Boulevard congregation here in Columbia, and it's just been a blessing not only to be friends with him over the years, but also to see how many things Carmack Boulevard is involved in, and even that he's involved in the community to help things, to make things better, to minister to people. And so we're really thankful for his presence, and I'm really going to be focusing in our conversation and thinking about how we can minister to people dealing with grief. And I think that Demetrius is going to have a perspective that'll be really helpful as we explore those things. So I'll let you kind of introduce yourself, but thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. Obviously, as you mentioned, I have my hands on a lot of different things. And so, interesting enough, I don't know how many people know this, but our family owns funeral homes, both in Murfreesboro and Shelbyville. And so when you mentioned, of course, that tie-in to the grief, obviously leading a congregation as a minister and, counseling and being therapy and so on and so forth. And so, but it's an interesting dynamic. So I have served as the minister of the Carmack Boulevard Church for 10 years. This is my 10th year. Before that, I served at another church east of Murfreesboro. But my father actually is the one who introduced me to the funeral business, because he started the funeral home probably 20 years ago, the first one. And so he's a minister. I'm a PK, so preacher's kid. So that is an easy connection between grief and serving families that have lost loved ones, and so it's always probably been a part of our family and in the DNA of who we are. So it does come very easy. So
yeah, and I'm also a preacher's kid, so I understand.
Yeah, okay.
I understand where you're coming from there, and I think it's an area that sometimes we struggle to know exactly what to do. Every person's going to handle things differently. Every family handles things differently. And so I really wanted to get some insights from both your experience in working with funeral homes and walking with families through that process, and then walking alongside families, Carmack Boulevard. What do you think, what have you seen families need most in those times? What do you think when we're experiencing that? What are we looking for?
And I think that that's something that I say is that your presence matters. From time to time, obviously I'm asked to eulogize and asked to pray or read scripture, officiate different things. But there are times when a member of our church or somebody close to me, I may just show up for the funeral, just to be there. And obviously people will ask me, you want to sit in the pulpit? Would you like something to say? It's like, no, I'm just here to be present, because I think that just your presence speaks volumes. And I would encourage people just to show up, no agenda, no, I got a time schedule, just show up. And, it may be something as simple as sending a text. When I say show up, obviously we live in a space to where it's not just physically showing up, but it may be an email, it may be a card, it may be a phone call, but just showing up makes all the difference. And so I think that if you can get in your mind and even think it from this perspective, what would I want somebody to do for me? If I was going through this situation, if I was struggling, what would I need somebody to do for me? And so if that's how you are led, I think that's most helpful. So, yeah.
Yeah. And the presence is so powerful, and maybe one of the temptations, at least the temptation I feel, and maybe other people feel, is knowing what to say.
Yeah.
What do we say when someone is hurting? And even one of the reasons we might be reluctant to be there for someone is we think, well, what am I going to tell them?
Yeah.
Are there some things that you think are helpful for families to hear, for people to hear?
Yeah. I would say in that line, I know what not to say.
Okay.
Don't tell people how they feel. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Because you really don't. Even if you had a similar situation, you don't know how they feel in that moment. So making sure that you understand that, not leading with that, telling people, uh, I've heard all the things that people like, and just kind of cringe when
Right.
people say things, even like, they're in a better place. Don't be upset. It's kind of like, okay, but I want them here. And so it's that negotiation with trying to make sure. I think less is more. And again, that whole idea of just being present to help, to support, but really just thinking through what is it that I would want to hear, and how would I want somebody to help me through this process is probably the best thing. But just being careful about your words, being careful about not saying too much, a hug, a embrace, those things really go a long way. And I think that one of the things I will say this, in our space of ministering those who are grieving, is that we also have to understand that we grieve as well. I don't think that most people understand, just as preachers, the emotional connection you have with the members of the church. And so when it is that you lose one of the members of the church that you've spent years with, you've sat down with, you've married them, you saw their children born, all these different life, and then now they're gone, and you have to eulogize them, or you have to, stay strong in the midst of a very difficult situation. And I think that, if there was something I would say to those who are watching, is to have some grace for that, to where that as we are navigating and trying to minister to others, also pray for us, because that is a delicate situation.
Yeah, and you brought that up, and I know this isn't something we necessarily talked about beforehand, but
Yeah.
In those moments where even if someone's not a minister, they might be called to speak at a funeral.
Yeah.
That is someone they care about, family member they care about. And I know a lot of times when I talk to people who are going to do that, there's obviously a lot of anxiety, especially if you're not normally a public speaker.
Mm-hmm.
So would there be any advice you can think of if someone was saying, I've got to speak at this funeral? How do I do that? And if I experience emotion in front of everybody, how do I deal with that?
It's interesting you said that, because the oldest member of our church, he was 90 years old, Weldon Moore, that's his name. And Weldon was somebody that I was extremely close to. It would almost be like his relationship between me and my family was almost like a grandfather, and he just recently passed. And I was trying to, articulate and share what he meant to me and the church and his family. But during that, I got emotional. And there was a time in my ministry, I've been preaching now for 27 years. There was a time in my ministry I would kind of be like embarrassed by that. But at this place, I'm like, you know what? It's real. It's authentic.
Yeah.
This is who I am. I have real emotion. And I say that to say this, is that those who, you're going to have emotion. There may be times when you get choked up. There may be, where you don't say exactly what you were thinking, but just being your transparent, authentic self, I think people appreciate that. And I think I always say this, is that the knock against the church oftentimes is that, we kind of put on a facade, and I think that, us being really true and authentic, that we struggle, that we have hurts, that we got pains, that even opens us up to be, to be a conduit for those who may be seeking, who may be considering coming to Christ, because they say, you know what? He's up there crying and he's been preaching, or he's having emotion. So, he's just like me, or she's just like me. And so I think it's important to not try to be something that we're not. And I think that transparency and authenticity actually lends to others in a way that words couldn't necessarily say. Yeah.
I think so too. We do feel sometimes a pressure. I've even talked with some who believe, well, if I show emotion, maybe that says something about my faith, that I
Yeah.
don't think it's better for them, but it's okay for us to show our own emotion. One of the things about being a preacher's kid is that, at least in my case, I end up quoting my dad a lot, but I remember in a funeral where he was speaking with a member of our family, that he said, "I'll make a deal with you." At the very beginning, he said, "I'm probably going to get emotional. I won't let it bother me if you won't let it bother you."
That's
And
good.
I thought that was a good way to just say it's probably going to happen.
That's right.
And to be able to embrace that
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, it is.
I know we've talked about how we might help someone, maybe someone we go to church with or be there, but a lot of us, I'm sure people listening to this, not only have experienced grief themselves, but have watched someone that they love and they care deeply about go through the grieving process.
Yeah.
What would be some advice that you would give from your perspective? When people we love are grieving, what's
Yeah.
the best way we can help them?
So I think one of the things, and I made a note of it just to make sure I quote it right, but realize that everybody goes through stages of grief, and I think that maybe, some have saw this or understood this, but, it's this idea of that all of us go through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. That's kind of the 5 stages of grief. And so understanding that when someone dies, that's a denial. Are they really gone? Is this real? It doesn't feel real. It's like a dream. It's like, and then there's this anger piece of it, that I'm angry because they're gone. And how do I negotiate that? And, kind of bargaining, like, what could I have done? What did I do wrong? I mean, could I have, said something, did something, and then depression kind of sets in to where maybe you're not eating, maybe you're, not sleeping well, but then ultimately you move to an acceptance. And I say those stages of grief because I think it's important for us to understand where we're at. So if I'm trying to help you to understand what stage you're in, that what I'm doing for you in depression is different from what I'm doing for you in anger. And denial is different from bargaining. And so if I can understand where you are in this grief process, then I can better help you, and so maybe you suggest, talking to a therapist. Maybe you suggest, reading a certain passage of scripture, and those kind of things. But knowing where you are is critically important. And I think that, the interesting thing about grief is that because all of us have walked through grief. I lost my youngest brother, probably, it's been 4 years now. And a year before that, I lost my grandmother, who was really so super close to me and my family. And it's interesting because while I know what grief looks like and I know how it feels, my brother passed away a week before Thanksgiving. And so I have trouble sleeping sometimes around Thanksgiving. And sometimes I'll be like, what is this? What's going on? Like, oh, it's that memory kind of embedded to where that I'm feeling this emotion again. I'm going through that. And so, but knowing what's going on, at least kind of helps you to navigate through a little, okay, I'm missing my brother, and then it's kind of like, okay, all right, well, this helps, because at least when you know what's going on. I think what people struggle with sometimes is that they're feeling this range of emotion. They're going through all these things and they don't know why.
Yeah.
They don't know what's going on. They can't put a finger on it. Why am I not sleeping? Why do I not want to eat? Or why do I overeat? Or why do I don't want to talk to people? Why, what's going on? And they're going through some stage of grief. And because they don't understand it, they kind of, end up being the spiral and never really get to that acceptance place, because that's what we're trying to get to the acceptance of that. Even though it hurts, even though it's painful, I'm okay enough to go through life, because you don't want to stay stuck there.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also love the fact that the example you used points out how so much of this can happen without even us necessarily consciously knowing it.
Yes.
We're just dealing with something, with the example of, why is it this time of year this happens?
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably also good, and I'd be interested to see if you've seen this, but it'd be good to remind everybody that, grief does look different for different people.
Yes.
And even I heard someone say years ago that if you look at David in the Old Testament, he lost different sons and grieved in different ways depending on the circumstance.
Yes.
So is that have you seen grief look just a lot different depending on personalities?
Yeah, and I think that's a great example, because and that was the reason why I was saying earlier, try not to say to people, "I know how you feel." Like, just because if I lost my brother and you lost your brother, it may not be the same feeling. We may not be processing the same way. We may not even have the same relationships with them, to where it's just going to feel different. It's going to be different. And so, yeah, and that's a great point, because that connection and the depth of that loss, how critical was that person? It's when I lost my grandmother lived 3 minutes from us. And so I've got 3 brothers. And so she lived 3 minutes from us. So my grandmother actually came to our house on a weekly basis and washed clothes. Like, it's like, I had the best of both worlds. She would cook and she would wash clothes. It's like, and so when I lost my grandmother, it was a deep loss because of how close we were. Interesting enough, my children actually still grieve her because of how close they were. Because she lived in such close proximity, and because we spent so much time together, she was involved in their athletics, academics, so on and so forth. And so it was just different. So she has several grandchildren, but these grandchildren had a different connection because of proximity. And so, to your point, I mean, everybody, has these different relationships, which in turn has a different effect. And so, yeah, it's important to understand and acknowledge that, and it's okay. It's okay, because even in that example you made, it's like you would feel like that. So David had favorite children, what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, no, it's just a different relationship.
Yeah.
And because of relationships, grief affects you differently. So,
yeah. Yeah, that's very important to think about, and how the way someone deals with grief might be totally different than what would help me, but I can't always judge other people by how I would process
That's right.
things.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I would imagine, especially working in the funeral home business, you've probably seen a lot of people react to those moments in funerals very differently, and we can't always tell who's obviously hurting and who's not based on outward reaction.
Yeah. I mean, it's the whole spectrum, obviously, with serving, hundreds of families, you have, emotional to non-emotion, you have anger to celebration, you have that whole gamut of different how people react. But you're right. I mean, it has nothing to do with, how they are grieving. And then some people, it's much later that they start to feel the effects, because they didn't allow themselves to really, in that moment, to feel it, staying busy, have to plan this, have to do this, have to make the, and then all of a sudden now they have time to process, and it all comes as a flood of emotion. And so, that's another piece of it too, is giving yourself the space to be able to grieve, because it's very easy to get so caught up in your regular routine and kind of going through the motions, that you don't give yourself time and space to grieve. And so I think that's important for people to, stop, process. And even, I tell people that it's something you said earlier, is that oftentimes we feel like that it could be a lack of faith or lack of spirituality, because we're so grieving on such a strong level. I preach and I say, listen, I believe in therapy and Jesus, I mean, both and, I mean, and so, I can talk to my therapist, but I also need to pray. And so those two things work hand in hand. And I think it's important for us to realize that, that you don't have to be strong. You don't have to, walk through the process, and understand that, that in his weakness, then we are strong, and so when we're weak, he's strong. And so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I like that comparison of believing in therapy and in Jesus, because I really think there are a lot of ways God answers prayers through therapy and counselors. And so if I say, well, because I have faith, I shouldn't have to rely on help from others.
Yeah.
I'm cutting myself off from ways God could really bless me.
For sure. For sure. Yes.
And so, yeah, that's powerful. I like that. I know we've talked a little bit about when it happens to people we love in our family. One of the things maybe we struggle with, even in a congregational sense, is as the church, what do we do to help people? Sometimes we don't know what to do, and presence is obviously very important. But is there anything that you've either seen church members do that's been really helpful, or that you would say, hey, every congregation should try to do this when someone's grieving?
Yeah. I think it would take a lot of intentionality and being strategic about it. But if there was some way that there could be waves of help over expanded time, because oftentimes when the initial death happens, everybody's there. And you have cars, you have food, you have all these things. But then in a month, 3 months, 6 months, the gentleman I mentioned earlier, his wife, shortly after that, 2 weeks later, her birthday was a couple of weeks after he passed. And then I found out later that actually one of the members had invited her over for dinner, and they had like a birthday dinner together. I was like, how powerful was that?
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I was thinking to myself, what is she doing today? You can't be everywhere and do it. But I was thinking to myself, because I was aware of it, and I said, I wonder where she is. I wonder what. And then she told me later. But it's those kind of things to where if there could be a way for us to minister, support, and help over an expanded time, I think that would reap such a huge benefit and help those who are struggling. Because most times you get a lot of support initially, but it's over that 6 month and 1 year and 2 year, those anniversaries, the first, because that's a lot of anxiety around that. The first Christmas, the first Thanksgiving, the birthday, you know what I mean? Those kind of things, to where it's a in your face reminder that they're gone. And so if somebody could be there with you, as that you don't have to go through it alone, or you don't feel at least alone. Yeah. So I think that if there was some kind of way as the church that we could support over the length of the grief, whatever that looked like, and somebody to walk with you and help you and support you, not overwhelm you, but know that you've got a support here. So,
and that's such a powerful example with the birthday dinner, because that says, number one, this person cared enough to know when the birthday was, was thoughtful enough to realize it'd be the first birthday. I mean, there are all sorts of levels where that shows a lot of care.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested in your experience, if you've seen this, but sometimes we're reluctant, even in the weeks or the months after someone's passed. It's almost like we're reluctant to bring up that person around a loved one, because it's almost like we don't want to bring up something painful. And my experience has been, and people that have experienced deep loss have told me, that actually you shouldn't be afraid to bring up the person that oftentimes, maybe not all the time, but often they enjoy those conversations because it's a reminder of who the person was. And, is that something you've seen in your experience? Are people open to sharing stories about those they've lost?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because when I was talking about losing my brother, that my youngest, my son, who was my youngest child, was very close to my brother. They spent a lot of time together, and I say often that God blessed me with a version of my brother and my son. They have a lot of different similarities. And so it's interesting because as I look at him and I talk to him, sometimes I'll be like, I'm getting to spend time with my brother, because you are right. I think there's a proverb, like an African proverb, that says something to the effect that as long as you speak someone's name, they never die, And so it's this idea of that, we should speak their name. We should tell the stories. We should, because it allows them to continue to live even on through those stories and through those lessons and so on and so forth. And so, but I do get the hesitance, because when you feel like that it's going to bring up emotion, it's going to, but again, back to my point earlier, I think, for us not to shy away from the tears, not to shy away from the emotion, and to really embrace it, because it is who we are, and so if we cry together and we, have a moment, a transparent moment, it's okay, and so I do understand how people, don't want to, they feel like they're burdening the other person with maybe their emotion, but I think it's just the opposite. I think it's a healing, to when we can cry, we can share, we can talk, and kind of walk through this together. Because it really is a togetherness. It's not that you're here and I'm there. We're walking through this together.
Yeah. And that true strength, we always hear got to be strong in times, but true strength is dealing with all those emotions and feelings.
Yes.
And so I know we've talked about a lot of different aspects of this, but I just wanted to give you a chance to, before we wrap up our conversation, is there anything that you think of from your perspective that you're like, I wish more people knew this, or something we hadn't gotten to that you're like, oh, I hope people would remember this when we think about grief?
I think that having conversations with those that you love, all of us know we're going to die one day, but nobody wants to talk about it, So, one of the things that I have learned that allows families even to walk through the process easier is that when they've had conversations, that parents pull in their children and say, hey, when I leave this world, this is what I would like to happen. This is what, because so much of the anxiety is the not knowing. Like, what would my mom want me to do? What would my dad want me to do? What, the conversation that you wish you would have had. And I tell people often that, listen, don't ever have something on your mind or something you need to say and don't say it. Just making sure that all things are well with you and that I've had this conversation, even if it's a difficult one, to be able to, because oftentimes what I have noticed is that some of the people that have the more emotional outburst is things that they have regrets. I wish I would have talked to mom about this. I wish I would have said this to my dad. I wish and now it's like, it's too late. You've missed that opportunity. And so I just think that if we would press through the awkwardness, the difficult place of having these conversations, even when it's tough, that, I think that would serve us well. And so, but the problem is nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to discuss it. But the truth of the matter is that if you were to discuss it, it would be better. I mean, this entire, because we have to go through it. And so, if I've had some conversation with my dad, my mom, my brother, one of the things that rings always so right in my mind is that a day before my brother passed, we had a rich conversation. We had to really, my brother, the youngest. And so it was interesting enough because if you have any younger siblings and those who have younger siblings, the babies are the ones everybody takes care of. Everybody, does stuff for them. So my brother would go through me and my other brothers and he would say, hey, I need to borrow some money. Or I need to do this or whatever, And so he was strategic in where it'd be like 3 months before he got back around to me.
Right.
So, that's right. Yeah. He went through each of my brothers. And so, but it was something that happened because he is my baby brother. He always, I said, listen, anytime he asks me for anything, I'm going to just do it. I don't know why I decided to do that, but through that, just that interaction or that decision, it made it so much richer when he passed, just because I'm saying to myself, like, we just had a really great relationship, and so I think that if at all possible, not having regrets, and I think that if we could take that away, if there's anything that I want people to grab around this grief process, is that grieving is so much easier if you don't have regrets.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the regrets come from us not doing what we know we should do, for whatever reason. Whatever reason that wall is built up and you don't want to have that conversation on it. But yeah, if we can press through the awkwardness, have the conversation. I tell people often that the way even to introduce it is to say, hey, we're going to have an uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's good.
Just introduce it.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And then go from there and have the conversation in the spirit of love, considering yourself. Pray about it, but just we need to have an uncomfortable conversation, and then walk from there, and then pray that God works in the midst of that. So yeah.
Well, and I love that as an introduction because it communicates that I'm not going to enjoy this either.
That's right.
If this might be tough for you, it's going to be tough for me. We're in this together.
Yes.
So that's very, very good advice.
Yeah.
And appreciate you being with us.
Thank you for the invitation. Yeah. This is a great space, and I would say to people that grief affects everybody. It affects everybody differently, but the more you understand what you're going through, the easier it is to navigate. Not easy, but easier. So if I understand what I'm going through and where I'm at, and probably another important piece is that don't hesitate to ask for help. You don't have to go through it alone, whether it's through the church or whether it's through another counseling space, but don't go through it alone. There are so many resources to help you process that, and, making sure that you use the resource around you, because one thing about grief, that if not handled well, it can strangle you. Obviously, both of us have been acquainted, understand people that really struggled with grief for an extended amount of time, and the worst case scenario, obviously, is when grief so engrosses your life that now you're considering taking your own life or different things like that. And so that we would never want that. And that's why I urge people to get help, to ask for help, to, not feel like you have to go through it alone. Whether it's Graymere, Carmack, we can point you in a direction to try to get some help, but definitely don't ignore it. It'll go away. There are some things that are not just going to go away, and you can't just pray away, but you really have to talk to somebody. So it's important.
Yeah, it's very important advice. And just as a reminder, I think both of us, know this too, but if you're listening to this and maybe you're in Murray County, there are resources for you there dealing with grief, whether at Carmack Boulevard, at Graymere. There are Christians that would love to help you with that. And then even those who might not be in the area and are listening, there are resources out there. So definitely encourage people to take advantage of those.
Yes.
So appreciate so much, Demetrius, being with us. Appreciate everyone for joining us, and you can subscribe. You can share this with a friend. Maybe it's a good way to start a spiritual conversation. And if there's any way that we can help you here in Murray County, there are 2 church families who'd love to serve you, among others here that would love to serve you in Carmack Boulevard and Graymere. But we also just hope that this has been a spiritual conversation that's been encouraging to you, and we appreciate you being with us.
Yes.
Thank you for being part of Connections. We hope it was an encouragement to you. If you live in the Columbia area and don't have a church home, we would love for you to worship with us. You can find out information about meeting times, classes, and what to expect at graymere.com. You will always receive a warm welcome from the Graymere Church of Christ.